Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. This is Rachel Unruh, Chief of External Affairs at National Skills Coalition. So glad that you could all join us today to talk about this groundbreaking report, Closing the Digital Divide. I know that this report has brought a lot of new faces to this webinar. So for those who aren't familiar with National Skills Coalition, just a little bit about us. Our vision is that we believe that jobs that require skills training are the backbone of our economy. And that's why for over 20 years, we've been fighting for a national commitment to inclusive, high quality skills training so that more people have access to a better life and more local businesses see sustained growth. And we make good on that commitment through research and policy analysis, like what we're talking about today, through policy development that's informed by our national coalition, through organizing, technical assistance, and advocacy. And across all of these strategies, we bring an intentional racial equity lens. So in terms of why we're here today, National Skills Coalition and the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta set out on this project about a year ago for a couple of reasons. First, big picture, we all heard about the transformative and saw the transformative impact of the adoption of new technologies in the workplace during the pandemic. And we really wanted to understand the impact of those shifts on jobs across a range of industries. Now, within this context, I think everyone is aware that the pandemic really put a spotlight on the impact of the digital divide and the ways that that divide was falling disproportionately on people of color, people with low incomes, and rural residents. And so in response to that, we saw Congress make some pretty historic investments in closing that divide through the bipartisan infrastructure law. Now, at National Skills Coalition and the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta, we really wanted to make sure that state and federal decision makers who were implementing those laws had real-time data to really achieve the equity goals of that law. So we've planned a great hour today with the three authors of this report, Roderick Taylor and Amanda Bergson-Shilcock from National Skills Coalition, and Nye Hodge from the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta. So they're going to share the high-level findings from the analysis, and we're going to have some discussion about those findings with them and the implications of those findings, as well as a set of policy recommendations that can help close the digital divide and advance equity. In terms of questions, we're going to take questions from the audience at the end, but we encourage you to submit your questions at any time during the discussion as you think of them. And instead of putting those in the chat, we're going to ask you to do that by clicking on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and submitting them there. My colleague Caroline is going to be collecting and aggregating those questions so that we can try to get to as many as possible today. But I just want to assure everyone, if we don't get to your question, we're going to follow up with people individually if you submitted a question that didn't get answered. So without further ado, I want to turn it over to Roderick and Nye. They're going to talk to us about some of the high-level findings from this report.
All right. Sorry, getting my computer screen all in order here. So my name is Nye Hodge. Thank you, Rachel. I'm a research analyst at the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta, and you all have probably seen some presentations from us in the past. So let me start off by checking some boxes and start with this good old Federal Reserve disclaimer. The views expressed today do not necessarily represent the views of the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta or the Federal Reserve System. The Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta contributes research, data analysis, and tools to the public, including elected officials and partner organizations. FRBA does not advocate for or against specific legislative or executive actions at the federal, state, or local levels. The Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta does not provide grants or funding to the general public or to partner organizations. FRBA does not endorse or make any representations as to the suitability of partner organizations or their programs, and does not advise on the distribution of funds by partners. I also want to give you all sort of a high-level overview of the Federal Reserve and why the Federal Reserve cares about digital skills in the first place, right? So Congress has made the Federal Reserve responsible for monetary policy and the supervision and regulation of banks and payment systems. I'm calling specific attention to monetary policy, as this is the function within which I sit. Within monetary policy, there's a dual mandate. One is to keep inflation and deflation from rearing their ugly heads, which right now we have economists hard at work fighting inflation right now. But a lesser known function within monetary policy is to, and here's a quote, promote effectively the goals of maximum employment. As part of that, each Federal Reserve branch, and there's 12 across the country, this is the district map, have community development departments where we work to understand the various needs of workers and employers. We leverage research to inform policymakers, businesses, and state officials and practitioners on ways in which employment can be improved. So that's where this research comes in, right? We do not, however, make any policy recommendations. We simply provide the evidence base to help folks like you all make informed decisions, and our friends at National Skills can help you all think about how this research can inform policy. So now that all the boxes are checked, government red tape is out of the way, let's dive into why we're all here. So I want to kick things off with some context, right? When folks talk about the digital divide, they most often talk about broadband access. Does your rural or urban community have quality high-speed internet? How many homes have access to quality devices or don't have any devices at all to access web-based resources, right? These are both very important issues, and we're not here to diminish those in any way. But what's talked about even less and what's understood even less, right, is the digital skills divide. When folks mention the need for digital skills, the common criticism is everyone doesn't want to work in tech and not everyone wants to be a software developer, which are both true, but it's much larger than that, right? This research aims to shift how we think about digital skills and show just how saturated the need for digital skills are across all industries and the economy at large. So quickly want to start off with some technical background. So for this project, we actually analyzed 43 million job ads. And thankfully, Amanda, Roderick, and I have some digital skills because it would not have been possible to do this manually, right? The data set we used for this research came from Lightcast. Some of you may be more familiar with the names Burning Glass or MZ. Those two companies merged to form Lightcast. And Lightcast uses artificial intelligence to scrape the web every day for job postings. And then the AI turns that text from the job postings into a large data set that has tons of information, including occupational demand, skills demand, advertised salary, educational requirements that employers are requesting. And so this was the underlying data set that we used for our research. And what we found, advance to the next slide for me, Roderick. Thank you. And so what we found was actually quite astounding, right? We didn't have any preconceived notions, but what we would not have guessed that 92% of jobs are requiring definitely digital or likely digital skills. So what is a definitely digital and what is a likely digital skill, right? Great question, audience. A definitely digital skill is a skill that is unequivocally digital, like Microsoft Excel. There are other skills like bookkeeping, which is going to be employer dependent on whether the task is done in a digital fashion or by pen and paper. And without surveying every single company in the United States, we couldn't make that distinction. So we used the term likely digital. But our hunch is that most of the likely digital skills are being performed digitally. And this 92% number is really a resounding number and reflects how instrumental digital skills are to the US economy and not just tech. So I'm going to pass over to Roderick, who's going to provide some examples of how various industries are using digital skills.
Great, thank you, Nai. So my name is Roderick Taylor. I'm a research and policy analyst at National Skills Coalition. So like Nai said, in the following slides, I'll delve into some examples on how digital skills appear across industries that aren't the quote unquote traditional digital industries that we think of. So in this example, smartphone and mobile apps are becoming increasingly common in the construction industry. One company that NSC interviewed told us that their frontline construction workers often use 3 to 5 different mobile apps to get through each workday. They have to be able to use multiple apps to flag discrepancies with blueprints and to track compliance efforts. So you might think that you've never heard of augmented reality, but if you've ever used the IKEA app to see how your furniture will look in your home, then you've surely used it. Augmented reality often means using a phone, headset, or tablet to look at something in the real world and see an electronic image layered on top of it. Some big aerospace manufacturers, such as Airbus, which is pictured here, have been experimenting with this technology to help train technicians. Before the pandemic, medical office receptionists and administrative staff were often responsible for checking in patients. But when COVID hit, many of their jobs quickly transformed to include helping patients navigate telehealth appointments, a task which not only requires being comfortable with the technology yourself, but also being able to support those trying to access much needed healthcare. Wind turbine service technicians might be required to have familiarity with many types of software, including industrial control software. While the pandemic pushed many restaurants to offer online ordering for the first time, the overall growth in technology use among food service workers has been going on for a long time. Frontline workers are increasingly expected to use HR apps to manage their schedules, as well as other apps to process orders and interact with customers. These days, it's common that tractors are equipped with advanced technology to make agricultural work easier. For example, John Deere's AutoTrack technology uses sensors and GPS to precisely and automatically guide tractors over a designated plot of land. In advanced manufacturing, collaborative robots or cobots are becoming increasingly common. For example, in Indiana, there's a company that specializes in shredding old tires. The machine that does the shredding requires frequent rebuilding and repairs, and that work was originally done with only human workers. So as you can imagine, doing that work 8 hours a day is very taxing on one's body. So as the volume of work grew, it became clear that cobots, like the one that's pictured here, were needed to help meet that demand. And then this last example, forest rangers and conservation workers use forest management software to do a variety of tasks, such as to track falling trees and to track where plants are regenerating. So given the examples that I just shared, it's clear that digital skills are required across the board, even at the entry level. They also show that we're well past the days where only software engineers and cybersecurity professionals need digital skills. So this table here is a little complicated, but on the left-hand side, it shows the amount of job experience needed for a job, and the two rightmost columns show the percentage of job ads requiring likely digital skills and definitely digital skills. But if you look at what's circled in red, you'll see that about half, or 49%, of jobs requiring 0 to 2 years of experience require definitely digital skills. That percentage increases to 95% when you factor in likely digital skills. An example that I gave earlier, bookkeeping would fit into that likely digital skill category. So this table is the same one as before, but it replaces work experience needed with the educational attainment needed for jobs. So in yellow here, you'll see that about half of jobs that require a high school diploma or an associate's degree require definitely digital skills. And those percentages increase to 94% and 97% when likely digital skills are factored in. So from the two tables that I just showed, it's clear that people across the board need digital skills, even people early in their careers. But it's a misconception to believe that because younger people grow up with technology, that they know how to do everything digitally. That's simply not the case. Oftentimes their knowledge is fragmented, meaning that they're comfortable with some digital tasks, such as making a TikTok, but are not comfortable with others, such as creating a spreadsheet or scanning documents. So for this reason, it's important to avoid assumptions about younger workers and to ensure that workforce and education programs provide opportunities for people to build from the skills that they have to the skills that they need. And so now I'll pass it back to Nye to talk more about our research findings.
Thank you, Roderick. And when young workers, or any worker for that matter, acquire digital skills, they get paid more. This research found that by moving from a job that requires 0 digital skills to a job that requires even just 1 digital skill can boost pay by 23%. And this is a stepwise progression, right? The more digital skills workers have, the more they earn. Another example, moving from 0 digital skills to 3 can boost pay by 45% at the median. And so in the report, we actually show this progression for up to 9 digital skills, but You have to read the report. We can't give you all the answers here. And we know we only have limited time. So going to the next slide, when workers make more, they have greater economic stability, and there's positive spillover effects for their families, but there's also positive spillover effects for local and national economies. When workers make more, they spend more, area businesses get a boom, hiring increases, and government revenues go up. We ran a tax simulator for the great states of Illinois and North Carolina, and when workers earning median wage move from a job that has 0 digital skills to 1, federal and state income tax for that worker can increase between almost $1,400 and $3,000 per year, depending on family composition. Now, looking at small businesses, right? The demand for digital skills is not limited to larger employers. We looked at how many job postings a company put up in a single year as a proxy for business size. And here we're showing 2 of them, right? Small businesses that put up 1 to 50 job posts in a single year, and larger employers that put up 501 to 1,000 job ads in a year. Now, we want to call your attention to those 2 red bars. You can see that small businesses are requesting definitely digital skills almost as much as larger employers. So this should dispel the myth that small businesses are not digitally intensive. They're requesting those skills. The difference, though, larger employers have the in-house resources and infrastructure to train their staff, whereas smaller businesses are going to be much more reliant on public investment in education, workforce training, et cetera, to have a pool of talent to hire from. And we also looked at each industry's demand for digital or likely digital skills. And the lowest was 77% of jobs, which is a pretty high low, which was for the transportation and warehouse industry. The highest was 99%, which of course is for the information industry, which tech makes up a large portion of that. We also want to spotlight the robust need for digital skills in manufacturing, construction, utilities, and accommodation and food services. Just a few industries that one might not assume has a robust need for digital skills. And here we're looking at the subset of jobs that require definitely digital skills. And this is the demand for industry-specific skills by education. So that's a mouthful. Let me say it again. We're looking at the subset of jobs that require definitely digital skills. And this is the demand for industry-specific skills by education, right? So this shows that foundational skills training, while essential, is not enough. There's robust demand across education requirements for industry-specific skills. And Roger gave some examples of those earlier, and Amanda is going to go into more details about this later. But I think I'm going to take a moment here, and I'm going to go over to Rachel, who I think is going to kick us off with some questions.
Whoops, thanks, Nye, working on my digital skills over here. All right, so a lot of information, even more in the report itself, so we hope you'll take a look at it. There's links in the chat, but I want to start by talking about one of the big takeaways that we saw in the presentation so far, which is that there's a big payoff for gaining digital skills. It's pretty significant for workers. So Roderick, I want to turn to you first. Now, we know there are other factors at play beyond just skill development opportunities when we think about access to jobs that pay more. Can you talk about what the report found specifically at the intersection of digital skills and occupational segregation, and also how investing in digital skills training, particularly for women and people of color, might contribute to addressing some of that?
Yeah, sure. That's a very big question. So as you and many of the other audience members know, there's a long history of occupational segregation in this country, meaning that workers across different demographic backgrounds, so race, ethnicity, gender, to give a few examples, are often grouped together in particular industries. So this has occurred over the years for many reasons, including language barriers, access to quality education, and other structural inequities. So some industries, like the information industry that Nye just highlighted, has the highest demand for digital skills, but it's also disproportionately male and disproportionately white. In other industries, like the accommodation and food services industry, we see disproportionate percentages of people of color and disproportionate percentages of women. But we also see slightly lower demand for digital skills in those types of industries. So the lower concentration of women and people of color in industries that have the highest demand for digital skills, like the information industry, suggests that they could be missing out on opportunities to earn more and to gain digital skills, which obviously exacerbates income and wealth gaps. That said, many workers of color and women are clustered in occupations and industries that have rapidly growing demand for digital skills. So one example that we highlight in our report is community health workers. Community health workers, they're disproportionately Black and brown, and they're disproportionately women. We compared job postings from 2019 and 2021 and found that the percentage of job postings requesting digital skills for community health workers increased by more than 25%. And that's just over a 2-year period. So as I discussed earlier, more digital skills equals more pay, equals more economic contributions, and so on. So both workers and employers can benefit if an opportunity for upskilling is given.
Thanks, Roderick. So now I want to turn to you. We've talked a lot about this from the perspective of an industry analysis. And I want to drill down a little bit more on that lens as it relates to the findings, because I think often what we see with states and cities when they're thinking about the intersection of skills training and economic development or economic recovery policy, they approach it from the perspective of growth or target or high demand industries. But I think there were a few misconceptions that we see sometimes in policy conversations related to digital skills in an industry context, which you talked about at the beginning. Can you talk a little bit more about what you found in the data that can shed light on both consistencies and variations across different industries when it comes to digital skill demands?
Yeah, that's a great question, Rachel. And there are a lot of misconceptions, right, about digital skills, and we've been certainly dispelling many of those with this presentation. And Roderick and I talked a little bit about some of those industry-specific digital skills, and I'm glad you asked this, because I want to dive deeper into those details. So it is a common misconception, for example, that baseline foundational skills training is sufficient for most workers, and I touched on that, right? And that workers will acquire industry-specific skills on the job. But while baseline foundational digital skills are absolutely necessary, they are not sufficient for landing jobs. In fact, 92% of jobs requiring 0 to 2 years of experience, these are entry-level workers, require at least one industry-specific digital skill. So employers are expecting for employers across industries, whether it's a growing industry or not, employers across industries are expecting first-time workers to not just have foundational digital skills, but also industry-specific digital skills. And I'll use healthcare as an example. That's a popular industry in many states. Foundational skills and basic computer literacy will allow a healthcare worker to feel comfortable in front of a computer, but it won't get them the job when employers are requesting, even at the entry level, that workers know how to use patient tracking systems, for example, and other healthcare management systems. And smaller employers are less likely to have time and resources to train workers, and really need workers to come in at the door with some of these industry-specific skills. And that's where public investment funds, like from the Digital Equity Act, can come in to support.
Great. All right. So I see people are submitting questions. Please keep doing that. We're going to be trying to compile and aggregate those, and we'll get to those at the end. But now I want to shift to Amanda, who's going to help us think about policy opportunities that are before us to address some of the findings that Roderick and I have talked about today. Amanda.
Thanks so much, Rachel. And I'm so excited to see all these questions in the Q&A box. And again, anything we don't reach today in the Q&A period, we'll circle back to in a follow-up after the webinar. So you've gotten a lot of data from us already, and Brittany is continuing to drop links into the chat with our full report and with the state profiles for Illinois and North Carolina. how can you as an advocate use these findings to make sure that the federal funding that's coming through the Digital Equity Act, the BEAD program, which is the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program, and other funding actually pays off for workers and learners and job seekers in your community, as well as for small businesses. I'm going to take a couple of minutes now to walk through some specific recommendations that we have. Next slide. So underlying all of our recommendations are a set of digital equity principles that National Skills Coalition members helped us come up with in the past couple of years. Hopefully you've all seen these principles before, but they're also available on our website, and we are asking for individual sign-ons to these principles. So you don't have to sign your whole organization on, but if you personally are on board with these principles, we encourage you to go to our website and sign on. We'll be getting a link to those principles into the chat in just a moment from my colleague Brittany, and encouraging folks to do that. Next slide. So the first recommendation we have is pretty straightforward. Make sure that your state uses a chunk of its Digital Equity Act and BEAD funding to expand digital skills training. This funding is coming to every state. It is formula funding that is definitely coming from the federal government to your state. And your state is right now working on two plans. There's a state digital equity plan that your state is required to develop, and there's a BEAD action plan that your state is required to develop. And in both cases, your state has to describe how it's going to use the federal money to do things like close digital equity gaps. So for example, in your state digital equity plan, your state has to explain how covered populations like veterans, rural residents, people of color, folks with low income, people who are incarcerated, people with limited literacy or limited English language skills, people with disabilities. How are we helping all of these groups of folks build digital skills? We know that broadband is important. We know that digital devices are important. But just giving people a broadband connection and devices is not enough unless they also have the skills to use those effectively. So making sure that you're at the table with your state digital equity planning process is crucial to make sure that your state spends a chunk of this money on digital skills training. There's about $1.5 billion nationally going to the Digital Equity Act formula funding to states. And the BEAD funding is $42 billion, covering a whole bunch of different activities, including actually laying fiber and creating broadband connections. Next slide. We also have a set of very specific recommendations for your state digital equity planning process, and Brittany has just dropped those into the chat, so don't forget to take a look at those. Combining the findings from our report with census data can help you figure out how your state can best target the covered populations. We've done that for North Carolina and for Illinois, which are two states that we chose as examples in our report, and they're in the appendix to the report, so you can take a look at how we did that. The census data is publicly available, easy to access, and we're also happy to have an offline conversation with you if your state is trying to do that and you want to know how we did it for the other states that we profiled. Next slide. We're recommending as well that advocates work to get BEAD funds invested in broadband workforce programs. I just talked yesterday with folks from the Fiber Optic Association that oversees the industry certification for fiber optics technicians. They told me that only 3% of fiber optic technicians nationwide are women, despite the fact that this job offers a lot of flexibility and excellent pay for women who might want to pursue it. So we think there's some great opportunities to use BEAD funding to collaborate with nonprofit workforce development programs, adult education providers, and others who can help folks get on the pathways to these good jobs. Next slide. We also encourage investment in industry sector partnerships. Now, many of you are really familiar with ISPs and some of you less so. In this case, ISP does not mean internet service provider. It means industry sector partnership. It brings together 6 or 10 or 12 employers in a single industry, along with education and training providers, to talk about their talent development needs. You might think that this sounds a bit crazy. Oh, we're going to get a bunch of competitors in the room and they're going to talk to each other about their skill needs. I don't think they're going to want to tell each other the truth. The reality is, with a really strong facilitator of that sector partnership, you can have, for example, a group of hospitals get together and talk about their need for phlebotomists or patient care technicians. A group of technology organizations get together and talk about their needs, right? Whatever their needs might be, having the sector partnership as an avenue for convening them can help make sure that training providers are training people with the kinds of skills and credentials that are actually in demand in their local community. So we're not just doing train and pray, where we train you and then we pray you get a job. We're doing training where we know that there's a meaningful job waiting for you at the other end of it. Next slide. We're also encouraging advocates to think about how digital skills can be embedded in other state workforce development investments. 30 states have incumbent worker training funds that are funded out of the state budget. There are a whole range of other kinds of dislocated worker training or other types of workplace literacy investments. Making sure that digital skills are explicitly included is important, because what we hear from employers and from training providers is, well, if the rules don't specifically say that we're allowed to train in digital skills, then we're going to be cautious and we're going to not do that because we haven't been reassured that we're allowed to use this money to do that. So making sure that your state labor department and your state workforce board are really explicitly calling out digital skills as eligible is important. And of course, we know that they're most effective when they are embedded alongside of contextualized, right, education, right? So you're not learning digital skills in isolation or in a vacuum. You're learning them as part of industry or occupation specific training that you're already doing. Next slide. Of course, we know that supportive services are crucial, things like childcare and transportation. So making sure that as we talk about digital skill building, that programs that are designed to help workers build digital skills are investing in those kinds of supportive services is really crucial, because without those services, people often run into roadblocks and barriers being able to persist and succeed in the upskilling and training programs that they've enrolled in. Next slide. We also encourage you to advocate for financial aid to be expanded for high quality short-term programs. Many of you have been working with National Skills Coalition for years to advocate for what is sometimes nicknamed short-term Pell. So expanding Pell Grant access for higher quality, shorter term programs. We're continuing that push at the federal level with the Jobs Act legislation that's recently been reintroduced in Congress. And we're also pushing for that at the state level. So if your state is providing financial aid for high quality short-term programs, being really clear that that should include high quality short-term digital skill building, particularly when it's incorporated in the context of other industry training, is really important. Next slide. So that takes us through the top line recommendations that we hope you're going to take from this report. Happy to chat about those in more detail during the Q&A and also in follow-up emails if folks have additional questions. I'm going to turn things back over to Rachel now for the next segment of our program.
Great. Thanks, Amanda. And, you know, we're seeing a lot of common themes across the questions that are coming in, and Caroline is taking a look at that, and we're going to get to those in a minute. But Amanda, before we get into the audience questions, you know, you touched on this a little bit, but the goal of the Digital Equity Act is it's in its name, right? It's about advancing equity. So can you talk a little bit about how people should be thinking about this data as a tool toward that end in their state planning? I'm also going to ask you to scoop up one question that came through in answering that about what the deadline is for state plans. And then also just concrete examples you have from states so far about how they're using this data or thinking about utilizing this data in operationalizing the Digital Equity Act.
Yeah, such important consideration. So let's get the deadline question first. Every state is on the hook to submit their digital equity plan to the federal government within 12 months of having received their digital equity planning grant money. For most states, that means it'll be towards the end of calendar year 2023, so the end of this year. However, a lot of states are really hustling to get their plans drafted sooner than that, so that they can put them out for the required 30 days of public comment before they turn them into the federal government. So this is the time to get involved with your state digital equity planning process, because this is the moment when they are making those decisions, writing those plans. I know 2 states at least will be putting their plans out for the 30-day public comment period in August of this year. But ideally, you want to weigh in before they get to the point of having a written plan that they're putting out for comment. You want to be helping shape that plan earlier. And if you don't know how to find the person in your state who is in charge of that planning process, I have good news. The federal government has a really useful website. It's called internetforall.gov, and I've just put the link in the chat. And if you click on the map page there, you can click on your state and find the contact person for your state that is overseeing the digital equity planning process. So there's it's a pretty straightforward way to find the right person in your state. The second thing to keep in mind is that as those digital equity plans are getting rolled out, hopefully the data in our report will be really useful in aiding you, right? Your state has to talk about how it's going to help each of the covered populations meet the digital skills goals. So we've laid out in our Illinois and North Carolina appendices some examples of how you can go population by population and talk about, okay, here's what the census data says for our state. Here's what we know from the National Skills Coalition report, and here's how we could think about targeting to help close equity gaps in our state digital equity plan. Again, we're happy to chat more about this as folks get deeper into doing this work. And then the last thing you asked me, Rachel, was sort of how are states already using this information and moving things forward. It's pretty exciting. We've already done 6 state-specific briefings on this report. So shout out to friends in Utah and Tennessee and California and a number of other states, Colorado, that have been quick off the mark in making sure that state government agency folks and local and state advocates and providers got this information as early and quickly as possible. So the first and easiest way that folks are making use of this information is to understand how widespread the need is for digital skills and how important it is that people build both foundational and industry-specific skills. Some folks are also using this data to help them identify areas where there are industries that their state economic development folks have already targeted, and then kind of cross-tabbing to say, okay, well, whichever industry it is that your economic development agency has targeted, it turns out that there's demands for digital skills in that industry. So let's make sure that our digital skills investments are helping people build those kinds of industry-specific skills. A third way that states are tackling this is by adding questions to their own state data collection or data analysis process to flesh out some of this digital skill information, right? So some states have done this by adding a question on a state healthcare survey about telehealth services to better understand folks using or not using those. So there's a lot of different ways that states can collect information about how people are currently using digital skills and services, and that helps point the way to where there might be gaps. Some of you on this call know that Hawaii did a really innovative survey last year on digital skills, and we're hoping that our report will help position other states as they're designing their own surveys on digital skills. And then finally, Some states are, and Colorado here again has been a leader, are really connecting this to the business community and using briefings on this report to help the business community understand why digital equity is in their best interest too, and why we need the business community engaged in advocating for good policies on education and workforce development. So there's a whole range of exciting next steps that are happening. And I want to stop now because I know we've had a slew of questions coming in and we want to make sure to get to more of those.
Great. All right. So yes, there are a lot of questions, and thank you again to Caroline for helping me aggregate some of these. So there are quite a few questions that get at what I think we might call digital resilience. So questions about digital skills that are easily transferable across industries or jobs, or that are particularly good for supporting career pathways and advancement. That are sort of high impact digital skills. So I'm wondering if one of the authors can speak to that question.
I'll tackle that first, and then if Naya or Roderick want to chime in, they're welcome to do so. So the short answer is there's no magic list of skills that everyone should be trying to learn. But it is really important that people are comfortable, that they develop a sense of self-efficacy, that is a sense that they can control their own sort of digital futures and fortunes, and an ability to deal with novel digital environments, right? So Roderick shared, and I shared earlier, the examples from the construction industry where folks were having to use 3 or 4 different mobile apps in a given day. One of the companies that we interviewed for this report talked about, we sub for 30 different general contractors on building jobs. There are 5 or 6 different apps that those folks use. We can't train our guys in one app and have that be it. We have to have them be comfortable enough with transferable skills so that if they're presented with a new app, that they feel comfortable downloading and installing that, setting up 2-factor authentication to log in, creating a username, all the kinds of things that they'll have to do over and over again with lots of different kinds of apps, right? So the first, sort of takeaway is there's no magic list of skills, but helping people build digital resilience or digital fluency, as some people call it, is crucially important. The second thing is there are some folks, and I want to shout out our friends in Seattle who've done an amazing digital equity skills framework, as well as some other folks who are working hard on these issues through the federally funded Digital Resilience in the American Workforce, or DRAW project. So we'll be happy to follow up in the email of today's webinar with some links to folks who are sort of working on this issue of, okay, well, how do you teach digital resilience then? Because we know that's a really top of mind issue for a lot of workforce and education advocates.
Great. Naya, Roderick, do you want to add anything?
Not here. I think that was a great response.
Yeah, no, I'll just add that it's like just like Amanda said, right? We have to think about digital resilience, right? How do we get workers to not particularly, you don't have to train a particular set of skills, but how do we get workers to feel comfortable with dealing with digital technology in general, right? Are workers comfortable getting behind a computer, picking up a mobile device, whether you're working in healthcare, whether you're working at a restaurant, whether you're working in any industry or field, workers have to have a base level comfort with working with digital technology, because industry specific skills will vary depending on the job that workers are in. So like Amanda said, right, just having that comfortability is really what's key.
Okay, so let me put out the next question, which I'm going to try to sort of capture a number of questions that I'm going to call the what's missing questions. And I think these are probably somewhat methodological questions, but there's a few things that the audience has asked about that are potentially missed in the data. So one is implicit digital skills. So it may not say in a job ad that somebody needs to be able to answer emails, but the job requires that. And if they aren't responding to emails, that could lead to the end of employment. So how are you guys thinking about that? And then the other is jobs that are potentially not posted online. and how that might impact the findings. So who
Yeah.
wants to take those?
I'm happy to start, and then if Amanda and Roger want to add, that'll be great. I'll take the second question first, right? Jobs that aren't posted in the data. That's a great question and a great consideration. So the data set uses jobs that are posted online, right? And and no data is perfect. So there are going to be certain industries that don't really post online a lot. So like, for example, construction is an industry that we find is underrepresented in online job postings. And small businesses, sometimes they just put up a help wanted ad on their doors, but they're not posting jobs online, right? So that is a consideration. But unfortunately, the data that unfortunately, unless we're doing sort of, and I'm not sure, maybe NSC might have done more qualitative type research, but that opens a door for opportunity to do some more on the ground type work to understand the needs of the construction industry and those smaller businesses who may not have, who might not be posting jobs online, right? So there are definitely some gaps in the data set. But I think for the most part, this is a really good, the data set does cover a large range of industries and does have I don't have the exact number, but we do see a lot of construction jobs posted online. So we think it's still a fairly representative sample. And then to the other question about implicit digital skills, right? What are the ones that employers aren't posting? You're right, those are going to be some of the more foundational skills that employers assume that folks have, right? Do you know how to write an email? Can you build a report in Microsoft Word? Can you use Excel? Those aren't always listed, but having those foundational skills, like Amanda mentioned, in training, incorporating those foundational digital skills training within trainings will help workers have those sort of implicit digital skills. And also what we're finding is that employers actually are slow to update their job postings, right? We do know that during the pandemic, employers were requesting that workers needed more digital skills, but the job postings aren't reflecting an increased number of digital skills. So we actually believe that the numbers that we're presenting are actually higher in the real world. Employers are just slower to update those job postings.
Yep, and one more thing that I'll add to that is, I guess, the likely digital skills that we talked about. And it's a large percentage of job postings that require likely digital skills, but they encompass things that we believe are done with a computer, like bookkeeping. Like we think it's very rare that bookkeeping is only done using just a paper pen ledger. And so just furthering the point that it's like we're likely undercounting the amount of digital skills needed.
Great. And Amanda, do you want to speak to that? Nye mentioned the value of qualitative research on industries and jobs to fill in some of the gaps left by, the fact that some employers don't post online.
Yeah, so a couple things going on there. One, we've done 45 qualitative interviews in the last 2 years with business leaders and others who are directly involved in hiring for folks with digital skills, who are involved in internal talent development programs at their organizations. And we overwhelmingly find exactly what Nye and Roderick have just been talking about, which is even companies that know they need digital skills sometimes have outdated job descriptions that don't say that they need digital skills. And they only find that out when things get expensive for them, right? So we heard a story of one trucking company that switched everyone over to a different app to track hours and payroll. And then their supervisors were suddenly spending a huge amount of time on the phone troubleshooting things because they didn't put digital skills in the job description for their truck drivers. And yet it turned out their truck drivers did need digital skills in order to successfully submit their hours and payroll information, right? And so that was a huge challenge for them that they only noticed after the fact. In terms of, really small employers that may not publicly post job descriptions or job postings online, the thing to think about, right, is that this report is about percentages. It's about what percentage of jobs need these skills. There's a lot of jobs that might be internal hires that never get publicly posted at all that are from big companies. So if you think about what's missing from this data set, if those big jobs from big companies are also missing because they're internal folks getting hired into those roles, then the percentage is actually not that different overall. In other words, if there's a few job postings that are missing from big companies that hire internally and a few job postings that are missing from smaller companies that hire based on an actual bulletin board in their communities or through word of mouth, either way, the percentages of the demand for digital skills are still pretty similar. So I think that's an important point to keep in mind. I know we have other questions to get to, so let me pass it back to you, Rachel.
Okay, great. There are so many great questions, and we definitely aren't going to get to all of them. So I promise again that we'll follow up individually with people with answers and try to, get some of them out there on social media as well. Can you guys talk about, there's a question about disaggregated data on demographic categories, and I'm assuming from the question that this is about digital skill attainment. Is there disaggregated data on demographic categories, including race, gender, immigration status, immigrant versus non-immigrant, disability, veteran status, incarceration history, education level, et cetera? And I would just note that a lot of these categories that are mentioned here, those are categories in the Digital Equity Act identified as target population. So this is a really important question. Amanda, I don't know if you want to go a little bit more into that.
Yeah, so the short answer is yes, there is some disaggregated demographic data, but not completely. And here's why. If the data you're wondering about is who has digital skills, then we have basically one national data set to look at, which is the PAC data that comes out from the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. It's also called the Survey of Adult Skills. That data can be sliced and diced by demographic category to understand the level of digital skills, the level of foundational digital skills that workers have. What also can be sliced and diced is the data we have in the appendix to our report, which is the demographics of a particular region, and then you can juxtapose that with our findings. So for example, you could say, in my region, we know that statistically folks without a high school diploma are more likely to need help building their digital skills. And I can see that folks without a high school diploma in my region are more likely to be Black or Latino. You can use census data to do that. So then thinking about, okay, who do I invest in to help build their digital skills? Let me target some investments to Black and Latino communities to help overcome some of those inequities that we see. You can also look at that same kind of question when it comes to occupational segregation, right? So if you see that your advanced manufacturing is a huge issue in your community in terms of it's an important industry, there's a lot of employers, a lot of jobs, looking within that industry to understand from census data, what are the demographics of workers in that industry? How old are they? What's their race and ethnicity? What's their education level? That can also help you figure out, okay, where do we need to make particular investments so that as industries transform to require more digital skills, they're not leaving behind older workers or women workers or workers of color or folks who might, for structural reasons, have been shut out of opportunities to build their digital skills in the past. So those are some of the ways you can disaggregate census data to better understand what's going on and match it to the information in our report to then figure out how to target Digital Equity Act investments and other workforce and education public funds.
Okay, and then I'm gonna get in one more question, and Nye, maybe this is for you from the sort of community economic development perspective. Is there data on the impact, the fiscal impact from a community perspective, I guess beyond the sort of tax dollars? Is there a way of thinking about the impact on communities versus just individuals?
So this is actually something that Amanda, Roderick, and I and others wrestled with a lot, trying to figure out that fiscal impact. And to be honest with you, it's a hard thing to calculate. So I just say it straight out, we don't have a clear answer on that. Amanda, you might have other thoughts on this, but really the biggest thing that we were able to get to was that tax boost. But we know just high level that when workers make more, they spend more, it has those economic spillover effects. But to quantify it, there's just when we talk to several different economists on this, right? There's just so many different factors that go into quantifying an actual hard number that just given the limited time that we had to put this out, we just couldn't come to a concrete methodology for doing that.
If any funders are listening and you want to fund a big new study to really document this, that would be awesome.
All right. Thanks, you guys. So again, we will follow up with any questions that didn't get answered. We are running out of time, unfortunately. I want to be sure to share, and I think we're going to be pulling up some URLs for you, but want to share where you can get the report and a set of resources relating to the findings, and also resources that help answer some of the questions more deeply that were asked today. So first of all, the report itself can be found at the URL that you see here. And I just want to say, if you don't get these URLs written down, we are recording this, so we will be posting and promoting it. You can also find all the digital equity resources that we have on our website at nationalskillscoalition.org. If you look under campaigns and select digital equity at work, you'll find everything there. So in addition to the report itself, we have resources that can help you move from kind of information to action. And that's our experienced policy staff who you see here. And then also our previously published recommendations for implementation of the federal laws that we talked about today. In addition to that, 2 other publications that are very apropos of some of the questions that were asked today: a fact sheet on how to apply a racial equity lens to digital literacy, and digital skills fact sheets by industry, which drill down a little bit more into those demands. And then finally, the new landscape of digital literacy, which is another really rich, robust analysis with lots of data, which I can tell everybody who dialed in today loves the data. So be sure to check those out. The other place where you can find out more about digital equity, where you can keep this conversation going, is our 2023 Skills Summit in Washington, D.C., May 1st through 3rd. I just want to make sure folks know that our early bird registration deadline, which saves you $150 on your registration, it ends this Friday. So please be sure to register if you can join us. We'd love to see you in DC in May. So that's all for now. Thank you so much to Roderick, Nye, and Amanda for the time and effort they put into this great analysis and piece of research. Thanks to Brittany, Tiana, and Caroline on the NSC team for supporting this webinar. And just thanking all of you in advance, not just for joining us today, but for all you're going to do with this data to help close the digital skill divide. Thanks so much and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.